pleased to have you all here. Now I think we can start the seminar. So now I will give the floor to Dr. Albino Jopella, the Executive Director of African World Heritage Fund, to moderate the seminar. Thank you.
So now I would like to invite our distinguished speakers from the University of Great Zimbabwe, Professor Manyanga. Please take a seat. From the National Heritage Council of Namibia, my dear friend Alphas Band, please take a seat. We'll also have the presentation from WIPIC with Hairi Shim, and also from the Arab Regional Center for Bahrain. You're here. Yes, the director of the Center for World Heritage. Please welcome and take the seat. So basically, what we have for this session, it's a brief reflections on not only what united us as Category 2 centers, but how the concerns for strengthening capacities of professionals and institutions when it comes to matters of world heritage then brought us together, and we will briefly then look into those case studies. So I will first like to invite my dear friend Hairi to talk to us briefly about world heritage interpretation, the whys and how.
Hello, everyone. Sorry to occupy the floor again. Let me just open my presentation. Yes. Thank you. So I will be presenting about the World Heritage Interpretation. What is it, why, and how? So, you know, as WIPIC, UNESCO WIPIC was established in 2022, and it was established to focus solely on heritage interpretation. And for the last few years, we have received many requests from the World Heritage Site to enhance their interpretation. So to meet their needs, we have done many researches and also carrying out capacity building projects. So regarding the researches, we have values and attribute research, and we also try to make heritage interpretation principles. And we also have research on the sites of memory and the dissonant heritage. And regarding the capacity building program around the world, we collaborate with the African World Heritage Fund and also the Arab Regional Center for the World Heritage. So we have been carrying out many capacity building workshops for the site managers in the different regions. So that's the reason of this seminar. So my presentation will be composed of the 4 parts. What is heritage interpretation? Why is it important? And how it's done? And I try to wrap up my presentation with the 3 case studies to introduce the case studies. So first, what is heritage interpretation and presentation? So it didn't emerge from nowhere. So if you see the screen, Fremont Tilden, who worked for the United States National Park Service, was one of the first people to set down the principles and theories of heritage interpretation in his 1957 book, Interpreting Our Heritage. In his book, he introduced the 6 principles of interpretation, which still inspire generations of interpreters and site managers across the world to this day. So his main question was actually to how to connect heritage to people, how to deliver and communicate heritage values to the visitors. So all these discourses developed into the ICOMOS Charter for the Interpretation and Presentation of Cultural Heritage Sites, or what we call ENAME Charter. And it was able to suggest the definition of interpretation and presentation. And based on these researches and discussions, WIPIC and its international working group were able to actually also suggest the new definition of the heritage interpretation presentation. So heritage interpretation is a meaning-making process through communication, participation, and experience. and it increases understanding and promotes connections between people and heritage places. Whereas the presentation is a range of methods of interpretation delivery for enhancing experience, raising awareness and understanding, and inspiring engagement for heritage places. So what is it different from the past definition? So in the past, heritage interpretation was considered somewhat unidirectional because much focus was on the educational function, educational activity. So therefore, it had to be expert-centered. But now a new definition is telling that anyone can be the subject of the heritage interpretation, and the dialogue between the heritage and people is important. And we try to embrace different perspectives through participatory approaches that was discussed right here yesterday of diverse communities and stakeholders. And also it is saying that it is a process, not an event. Then we move to chapter 2. Why do we need heritage interpretation? So we, from the tentative list to the listing, and even after the inscription, we were asked to be involved in the act of the interpretation. That includes preparing nomination dossier, including attribute mapping and values and attribute research, and also writing up the SOUVs as well. And also the committee sometimes requests the site to have the heritage interpretation strategy that is sometimes in the form of management plan, including the interpretation. And sometimes it could be also the visitor center and museum exhibitions. And why is it important now? Because as you are experiencing or as you are observing that managing World Heritage Sites in 21st century it's not an easy job. We now face a new issues and different challenges because the concept of heritage and also the way of conservation is evolving. And beyond the physical preservation, the recognition of the social and intangible aspect of heritage becomes more important. And what we discussed in the committee, securing balance between the development and conservation is important. And also seeking sustainable tourism and rehabilitation of community is something that we want to try to achieve through the interpretation. And of course, you know, we now have more and more of sites of memory, dissonant heritage, and they require a multi-layered understanding of heritage. And through the WIPIC's regional heritage interpretation programs, we were able to identify some of the needs for the heritage interpretation, different needs, different areas. So you can see what are the needs for the heritage interpretation. And WIPIC also had a chance to analyze the use of interpretation in the decisions for the state of conservation and the nomination process from 2020 to 2023. And you could see that it's obviously the number is increasing. And also if you see the meaning of interpretation in the decisions for the state of conservation and nomination, it is also changing. So from the very beginning, the meaning was usually a very simple statement, usually integrated with the tourism, but now the meaning is quite diverse. So coming to the recent years, the use of interpretation now encompasses new keywords such as participation and education. And the interpretation is now associated with many different notions. Then we now move to how do we plan and implement the heritage interpretation? This WIPIC's research on heritage interpretation strategy is actually currently in progress now, so it's very provisional state, but I could share with you some of the concepts. So first, interpretation strategy is a higher level plan, an overviewing of different elements and perspectives, whereas interpretation plan is detailed process of executing the strategy in a specific context. And the interpretation framework is the actual mechanism of interpretation, how interpretation works. So it entails themes and narratives. And the interpretation concept is the core idea of your interpretation. So to provide practical references for the site managers around the world and in the field, we are working on a guideline of heritage interpretation process This is very provisional state, and I want to stress that it is an open-ended, so that you can use it in a different context. So basically, it's composed of 5 phases. So I don't think I have time for guide you through the specific steps, but then it is 5 steps of the guideline that we want to work with you to refine it. And now I want to briefly introduce the 3 presentations that will be followed by mine. So the Great Zimbabwe National Monument, World Heritage Sites, with WIPIC and Great Zimbabwe University, we did the interpretation for 2 years, and Professor Manyanga here will be delivering the presentation right after mine. And Pearling, Testimony of an Island Economy in Bahrain. We also did the site managers workshop with Arab Center in April in Bahrain. And actually, literally, when we visited the site, we were overwhelmed by its beauty and the advanced interpretation. And finally here, we, with Africa World Heritage Fund, WIPIC organized the site managers event last year at 12 of Fontaine site in Namibia. And there was many interesting discussions, and our colleague Alfie here will be also delivering the presentation. So I only had the 15 minutes, so thank you very much for your attention. Now I give the floor to Jopella.
Thank you so much for the overview of the framework that basically guide us through those different case studies. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Manyanga to take us to the case of Great Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Dr. Jopella, and Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation will focus on the case study of Great Zimbabwe. And I think for most of us, we'll be asking the question, why an interpretive framework for such a well-known site like Great Zimbabwe? What are the issues? Don't we know a lot about this particular site? So my presentation basically is to show that need for an interpretation framework. Here we are dealing with the whole process of meaning making, and if it's that process of meaning making, it's a process which is complex. It involves individuals, it involves groups of people, and because of that, you realize that we are coming up with different interpretations, and therefore the processes themselves, they have to be participatory, they have to be inclusive, they have to be comprehensive. Great Zimbabwe is a site that was listed on the World Heritage List in 1986 on the basis of the 3 criterion, and I won't get into the details in terms of its importance, but I'll do that as I proceed with my presentation. The most outstanding thing about Great Zimbabwe is that it is the largest man-made ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa. And what is outstanding about it is the impressive structures, advanced engineering and architectural skills that are demonstrated by that particular site. Also important is that it is a capital of one of the most powerful and influential pre-colonial empire in Southern Africa. I can add on, it's a symbol of African cultural heritage and source of national pride. You can add also about its stunning setting within an environment comprising of granite hills and valleys. And also to the scientific community, it provides a lot of information and secrets of this ancient Shona civilization. So that is what probably we will talk about Great Zimbabwe, what we would know about Great Zimbabwe. But most important are issues of spirituality, in which it is a revered sacred site, the dwelling place for ancestral spirits, a strong connection between the land, the living, and the dead, a venue for national ceremonies and rituals, a unique spiritual energy, and a place for healing, and to others, a place for pilgrimage. And one can also add also the key importance of Great Zimbabwe being a regional and international trade center, which represented a symbol of globalization way back from about the 11th century to about the 17th century. But in terms of trying to justify this framework, one has to look at the context of Great Zimbabwe. And if one is to look at the narrative that we have about Great Zimbabwe, is that we have always had a prevailing singular official narrative which marginalized certain voices, especially those of Africans, non-experts, and local communities. And on this particular note, I would like to also say that this is probably the case with a number of African and other Asian countries, sites, where they have not been that inclusive. I'll give the example during the colonial period, for example, where the official narrative marginalized certain voices, especially those of Africans, pro-African origin, non-experts, and local communities, where African communities were mostly reduced to laborers during excavations. So they had no role to play in interpretation, they had no opportunity to express themselves, and also to relate with this particular place. And this was the sort of thinking then that was obtaining during the colonial period. And then I'll move straight away to the post-colony, where at independence, there was this idea that we need to correct that unitary narrative and move on to give new perspectives, a new history and a past, and also, like the other quotation from one of the leaders, that it is now time to set the record straight and to seek out and to renew our past. And again, we proceed to look at the kind of revisionist scholars to do with Great Zimbabwe, where basically the issues largely focused on academic narratives that tended to negate local stories, traditions, and cultural processes associated with the Great Zimbabwe. And therefore, the narratives did diminish the rich cultural diversity and individual experiences that are connected with the site. So in terms of trying to talk about the interpretation of Great Zimbabwe, it is very clear from the two contrasting examples that it is actually an interpretation that is in need of rehabilitation. And the key issues is that when you look at the interpretation to date, it is still a very little attempt has been made to correct some of the problems from the past. So there is need to expand and also to diversify the voices that tells the story of Great Zimbabwe. But not only the fact that we need that narrative, but this also calls for a decolonial, multivocal and inclusive interpretation, which is focused on the interpretation between heritage, conservation, development, tourism, and taking into account alternative opinions of communities, vulnerable populations, women, the youth, and other role players. And it is in this context now that we had this partnership between Great Zimbabwe University, the International Center for the Interpretation and Preservation of World Heritage Sites, WIPI, National Museums and Monuments of Zimbabwe, UNESCO Regional Office, and funded by the French Development Agency, and with the coordination of UNOPS to try to come up with a new interpretation for Great Zimbabwe. And its aim basically, one can look at it from the three key points. One, the need to be inclusive and comprehensive. Secondly, the need to adopt especially digital technologies in the presentation of Great Zimbabwe. And lastly, the whole issue of setting up various themes that would focus in terms of articulating current issues to do with Great Zimbabwe. And the guiding principles, issues of inclusivity, multivocality, collaboration, dialogue, understanding, and empathy. So in terms of the process itself, we have seen already that basically we were focusing on one, developing the concept, and then moving on to do the framework itself. And I've talked about issues of inclusivity, and then in terms of the major theme, it was to talk about Great Zimbabwe as a great African civilization where the past and the present meet. And we developed a number of themes, and using that particular framework, it tells what to see, what to find, how to experience, and what to share. But what is coming out of this framework from our research is that the communities, they simply emphasize on the key point that we want to be part of the interpretation and storytelling at Great Zimbabwe. Our lessons from there is that we need to build a framework which is based on local content. We need to accommodate multiple narratives. We need to tone down on hegemonic narratives, which tends to dominate everybody else. And then also to work a framework which is guided by best practices, interpretations, and lastly, to use standard toolkits for inclusivity and issues of comprehensiveness. But if anything, one of the key things that we have learned from this is that many hands make light work. And I asked the question, why an interpretive framework for Great Zimbabwe? And the examples that I was given were meant to show that we have got this unfinished business as a post-colony. How do we tell a story which is more inclusive, which is more comprehensive, and which gives our visitors a better experience of this World Heritage Site? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Manyanga, for this very enlightening and fascinating case that is well known, but it seems that not all is known about it. I would now like to invite dear friend Rashad to now take us to the Turling Path in Bahrain.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends and colleagues, welcome. So the Arab Regional Center for World Heritage is a Category 2 center established under the auspices of UNESCO. It was established or incorporated in 2010 and began operations in 2012. And it is an autonomous and independent legal entity that represents the 19 Arab member states that are a signatory to the World Heritage Convention. Now, we began our engagement with WIPIC actually through an MOU that was signed in April, but that was very quickly followed up with a workshop that we had on interpretation not too long ago. We had 25 participants from 15 countries representing 24 different World Heritage sites. And the example that we used, we hosted this in Bahrain, to use the example of the Pearling Heritage Trail, which I'll be talking through. Now, the objectives was fundamentally to provide participants with the comprehensive understanding of interpretation, but also to facilitate that understanding towards their own sites, identify the issues that we're facing, both individually in different sites and as a region, and ultimately, which is our role as the Arab Regional Center, is to enhance the representation of World Heritage Sites in the Arab region, and to do so through developing concrete steps through an action plan that we could use to address the different challenges and provide better solutions for the sites that we're facing. You've really thrown me off. I feel like I'm completely off schedule here. But this is Beit Siadi, which is our second inscription on the UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was inscribed in 2012, and this is one of the main houses along the path. And let me tell you a little bit about it. So, the inscription is Pearling, a testimony of an island economy. And it was a cultural and natural site inscribed under the criterion number 3. And it is an ensemble of properties, so it's a serial nomination. It makes it very interesting because it covers the original seashore, part of the original seashore of Muharraq, the fort that protected it, 3 oyster beds that are offshore, and about 16 or 17 properties, depending on how you define the fort, that are onshore, that are on land. Now, let's start with, oh, here we go. So the oyster beds. I think it's interesting that the site over here mixes a number of different sites. So this is the natural part of it, the oyster beds. There are 3 oyster beds, we call them Herat, which are in the northern shore of the island Muharraq. And they represent some of the richest sources of oysters and pearls. So traditionally, boats would be coming from as far as Kuwait and the UAE in order to dive in these beds in order to kind of extract the oysters that were considered to be the sources of the best pearls. Alongside that, we have the original shoreline. The shoreline was very important because not only would this be the site of departure for a lot of the pearling boats, they would also be where they would come back. The shoreline also was where officials were greeted, so it was sort of our airport of sorts at the time from Muharraq. And then we have 17 urban properties, starting with the fort, and then a number of different houses which represented different parts of the nomination. And as we go through these, I will hopefully be able to. Yeah. So let's get straight into it and the interpretation part of it, which is, I think, what we're here to talk about. The process started with community consultation at the very, very beginning, when the idea of inscribing the site, a large part of it was, as you could imagine, how do you interpret this very wide range of different types of structures, different types of interactions? So it was really about identifying how it is that the people of this living city interacted with their past, interacted with the traditions, interacted with the structures that were there, and interacted with the physical sites that we had. So we began the process of the nomination file and a conservation plan in 2009, having done a lot of consultation with the community. Data collection was begun through an anthropologist who was hired specifically for this task to interview local communities, establish a context and understanding for how it is that people reacted. And as we began to identify the various elements of the site, more investigation led to more understanding and a deeper level of interpretation of the site. So the process was a long one, and it continues to be ongoing as we continue to learn more about the site as we go along. So with regards to the presenting our heritage, we created a pearling path, and it's important to understand that this path it's an imaginary path. How do we tie together 17 different properties, a seashore, a fort, and 3 different pearling beds offshore? So we had to try to find a way of not only making it interactive, but also creating access to people to these sites. We established 2 visitor centers. The original one was established at the port or the seashore of Abu Mahir. That was done in 2012 upon inscription, and then as we continued to develop the site further and further, we built another interpretation center and a visitor center, sort of halfway along the middle. There'll be a map coming up to it. Alongside the 2 visitor centers, we also established a Pearl Museum, which houses perhaps some of the tools, the equipment, but also showcases how far and wide the pearls that were extracted from the seas of Bahrain were appreciated, including items from the Cartier collection, other esteemed jewelers, and so on. And ultimately, along these different, let's say, the 17 buildings, each of them had a small exhibition relating to what it was that was conducted, the activities, the lives of the people that were living there, how they were, and we tried to make this as interactive as possible. Finally, the infrastructure that needed to be built around it, including a pedestrian bridge to cross highways to make the path accessible from the seashore, to have multi-story parkings and a lot of public spaces where you had coverage from trees, water fountains, and a pathway that people could follow in order to stop along the way. So this is the pearling path. It starts off, if I may, with the seashore down there, with the original visitor center, and then the other visitor center up there. And as you can see, it's not a natural, a linear path. It kind of runs across a very dense urban landscape, which created its own challenges in how it is that we tied together these spaces. So the Abu Mahir Visitor Center is the very, very first one. The Pearling Path Experience Center is the latest one that we've added. Well, actually, the latest would be the Pearl Museum, but alongside it. And each of these have their own kind of connection to the site and to the various elements of it. The pedestrian bridge is another example of the connectivity, the infrastructure that was required in order to bring things together because there was a highway to cross. And then this is an example of the Dana Square. There are 17 of these little squares dotted along the way. Thank you, see, completely off. Where people would congregate, get together, have breakpoints and rest along the way. And we also use these as public spaces where we're going to interact. I'm going to start talking really quickly to get there. We've already seen this. Presentation method's kind of important. There's obviously displays, as museums normally would have, projections on walls, information panels, but we also, so this is one of the interesting examples. One of the houses was used as a traditional herbalist or medicinal house. So in interpreting the house, what we did is planted some of the traditional herbs that would be used in order to treat some of the pearl divers and make it another living example of how it is that it still continues. We also have audio installations of the music that was done by the pearl divers, smell installations where we had the tobacco that was imported, or sometimes the gar that was used to coat the boats, lime. Video displays typically is easy ones. There we go. The place is kept alive. We use a lot of guided tours to get past, obviously a lot of social media, and a lot of intangible cultural heritage as well. So music is a fundamental part of the pearl diving experience, and we had a lot of different types of traditional and murada that women would do, the fajri and bahri arts. I'm sorry, it was a really good presentation, by the way, that I'm having to. And then community engagement. And this is where it starts to become really important for us in our conversations today, because this is how you ensure that the site stays alive. This is how you ensure that the traditions are carried forward. This is how it is that we make sure younger audiences and future generations are going to be able to continue to use the site and interact with it. And then we get to the really interesting part, is the interpretation part, which I will leave to questions at the end, since I'm sure I'm running over time. But this is what the issues are. And I think I want to thank WIPIC in all of this. I'm rushing through. Because this is where the understanding, this is a great site for interpretation, because there were so many different perspectives on it, so many different interactions, so many different histories, so many different people that we needed to all bring together. The lessons learned from this were applied on a lot of different sites around the Arab world, 24 different sites, through the workshop they hosted with WIPIC, and that was a great driver towards an understanding of the challenges that we face in the region. The final outcomes is that we have identified a path forward. And these are not just thematic elements that we want to talk about. There are action plans behind each thematic element. And with WIPIC, hopefully we will be hosting more workshops addressing each of these thematic areas and having specific action plans for each of the regions. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you so much. Very interesting indeed. And we will try to allow at least a minute for people to learn more in the question session. Now I'll ask Alpheus from Namibia to now take us through the iconic rock art site of Tafelsfontein.
Afternoon, Your Excellencies. Afternoon, distinguished guests, friends and partners. My name is Alpheus. Can you hear me? My name is Alpheus Bam. My presentation will be on Tafelsfontein, or known as Twin Ice World Heritage Site. The presentation will consist of description of the site, basically, interpretation methods, and then the workshop reflection on the workshop that was held last year in Windhoek through WIPIC and African World Heritage Fund. So first of all, a brief description of the site. Tafelsfontein, known as Twin Ice, is a prehistoric site, significantly located approximately 90 kilometers west of Korigas, a town situated on the western side of Namibia, in the Kunene region. The inscription of the site is basically on two criteria, criteria 3 and criteria 5, as can be seen there. Why focus on heritage interpretation? It is to enhance understanding of the site, ensure inclusivity, educate and inform, and then engage in activities through interactive and immersive experience, as you can see there. Then interpretation methods on the site. Basically, David Levine, a farmer settled in Tweefelfontein in 1946 with the intention to farm, but the area is known for very little rainfall, so he called it Tweefelfontein, meaning in English the doubtful fountain, because of the scarcity of rain. Tweefelfontein was registered in 1951 in the National Archives, as you can see, and then this is the visitor center of Tweefelfontein is an it's a clear example of a green architecture, as you can see there. I'll just go through you. The walls at Tweefelfontein, as you see there, are hand-packed wire carbon baskets filled with local sandstone and recycled rubble. The other thing, the roof, the steel structure covered tiles made from recycled oil bands. And then the floor, Namibian made clay bricks on compacted sand. So as you can see, minimal use of cement was used here to reduce embodied energy. And then few benefits of green architecture: lower embodied energy, reducing contributions of global warming. Rusted steel blends with surrounding red and brown rock. So the rusted steel that was used was blending in with the area of Tweefelfontein, so it did not really stand out. Well drums used as tiles allow for directional curves and roof design on this structure. It's easy to dismantle and relocate if necessary, because minimum cement was used in this place. And it demonstrates effective use of locally available materials. In the construction of the visitor center, only local material were used. Nothing was imported, and most of the material was found around the area. Okay, Tweefelfontein offers guided tours, basically, for two reasons. First, to enhance visitor experience by providing comprehensive information about the site. Secondly, to preserve against vandalism and damages. That's why the two guided tours are main two reasons why guided tours are provided. And Tweefelfontein also offers virtual reality, which was made possible with funding of African World Heritage Fund. As you can see, this reduces the pressure on the paths and everything, because virtual reality reduces the pressure on the site. The information center, there's a well-equipped information center. The site features an information center that offers comprehensive details about the site, ensuring that visitors, whether or not they participate in guided tours, remain well informed. And then Namibia celebrates usually Heritage Week each year in September, of which Tweefelfontein provides access to locals through Heritage Week. The digital enhancement in 2021, in September, National Heritage Council with Namibian Broadcasting Corporation launched two documentaries, or basically on the two World Heritage sites, which is Namib Sea and the Tweefelfontein World Heritage Site, to enhance digital engagement. Heritage education in Namibia to date is policy on arts and culture, usually, and inclusion of heritage-related topics in the school curriculum, which is the junior secondary school curriculum. And then we have the launch of school culture and arts clubs. These are just a photo of like a promotion from Heritage to have schools during the National Heritage Week. And lastly, we'll see on reflections from the workshop that was held last year in October through Week Peak. Workshop reflections, workshop on World Heritage interpretation and presentation hosted in Windhoek. The enhancing site visibility. One of the issues that was discussed is enhancing site visibility parking redesign. As you can see, current issue at Tweefelfontein is the first thing you encounter when you reach the site is the parking, and it's obstructing the view towards the site. So that was discussed, as it blocks the immediate view and interferes with the dramatic mounting scenery that you can actually view. Potential updates, it's to relocate parking to a less prominent area, then implement landscape screening techniques, design sunken or partially underground parking, and then create a scenic approach path from parking to site, because like we say, it's actually obstructing the whole view, so it can be redesigned to that extent. The other thing that was found is that the reception area, when you get to the reception area, the first thing you encountered was the craft shop. And that's not the primary reason the visitor visits the site. So it just takes the whole focal point away from what they actually come to experience and see. So we had to, as you can see in the next photo, we had to relocate the whole craft area, and then the open space is currently busy being repurposed, so the focal point can be the reception and the scenery that the visitors wants to enhance and experience. Heritage interpretation, opportunities and challenges. The opportunities encountered here are enhanced learning, understanding of the site's overview. VR reduces pressure on the site, especially during peak seasons, and it enhances accesses. But the challenges requires training and feedback at all times, and digital tools requires regular maintenance. Those are the two challenges. Basically, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Alfie, and please help me congratulate the presenters for an amazing presentations and very interesting ones on this topic.